Hello, and welcome to the CMI-TV video channel. I'm Rob Congdon, your host for this series of Bible teaching. Today's class is taught by David Moss, pastor of North Hills Bible Church, located in York, Pennsylvania. This fourth lesson is one of an 8-part series on angels taught by Pastor Moss during a 2003 mission trip to Durbanville in South Africa. In David's previous classes, we learned that God created various groups of angels called cherubim, living creatures, seraphim, and beasts. While angels are higher creatures than man, but of a lower nature than God, one day man will be higher than the angels and served by them. David then taught about the characteristics of the nature of angels, where he stressed that they are beings with personalities that have names, using 3 angels as examples of their names. In the last class, David taught on the ministering aspects of angels. Now, in today's class, David will teach about Lucifer's great fall, going into depth about the cause of Lucifer, or renamed Satan, the adversary's fall. He then began the study of the fallen angels called demons. Please join me now for today's excellent class.
We've talked about the character and gifts of Lucifer before his fall, and we talked about the fact of his fall. We want to proceed from this point and talk about the nature of the fall in a little more detail. In your notes on page 6, we looked at letter A, Lucifer before his fall. Letter B, his fall is recorded in the New Testament. And then there's a typographical error in letter C. Isaiah is in the Old Testament, I assure you. It's not in the New Testament, at least unless Brother Blackwell corrected your notes. It says his fall recorded in the New Testament, Isaiah's reference. That's in the Old Testament, I assure you. So we look at Isaiah chapter 14. Isaiah chapter 14. Just for a moment. There's not quite as much information here in Isaiah chapter 14. And I like to describe it in detail a little better from the Ezekiel passage, but we'll just touch base here. Isaiah chapter 14 and verse 12. It says, "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which did weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God, I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north, I will ascend above the heights of the clouds, I will be like the Most High." That's where he went wrong. At the root of this was his inability or his refusal to be content with what he had. Contentment is actually a very important characteristic for the believer as well. Because it tells us in 1 Timothy chapter 6 that godliness with contentment is great gain. At the very root of Satan's fall was his refusal to be content with what he had. And I think that emphasizes the importance and the imperative of contentment in our Christian lives. You need to pursue that concept. What does it mean to be content? And what is the relationship between contentment and godliness? I would challenge you to study that out and examine that. With that, let's go over to Ezekiel chapter 28 once again. And in your outline, let's go down to Roman numeral 8, Lucifer's great fall. We'll jump right down there and we'll begin looking at it in some detail. The nature of Satan's fall is exactly the same as the nature of the depravity of man. In Ezekiel chapter 28 and verse 15, it says, "Thou wast perfect in thy ways from the day that thou wast created, till iniquity was found in thee." And the word iniquity is also significant. Remember, it says in the Ten Commandments that God visits the iniquity of the fathers unto the fourth generation. The word iniquity, while it is one synonym for the word sin, has a particular nuance to it. Iniquity refers not to specific sins that we commit, but iniquity refers to the willfulness of our heart to do wrong things. So in the commandment where it says God visits the iniquity of the fathers upon the children under the fourth generation, what he's doing is saying that the tendency to do particular kinds of sins is what is passed on. Iniquity is the tendency, the willfulness, the bent of our will. What we have an inclination to do, what we have a desire to do. What is the desire of your heart? Remember how he says in Psalms, delight thyself in the Lord, and he will grant thee the desires of thine heart. Well, what are the desires of thine heart if you don't delight yourself in the Lord? You will still have desires of your heart if you don't delight yourself in the Lord, but they will be things that will lead you to sinful activities. So here, iniquity was found in him. You see, before he ever did anything wrong, he desired to do something wrong. And before Adam and Eve ever ate of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they decided to do it. And they had a will to do it. And so iniquity was found in him. He was wrong in his heart, and he was guilty in his actions. So in verse 16 it says, "By the multitude of thy merchandise they have filled thee filled the midst of thee with violence, and thou hast sinned." And there's an action word. Iniquity is a word of the will. Sin is a word of the action, behavior. And so the two parts are there. The willfulness of his heart to do this. Hebrews chapter 10 says, if we sin willfully, if we actively choose by the desire of our own heart to do this wrong thing, that's exactly what Lucifer did in the beginning. And once iniquity entered his heart, then he sinned. He committed the act. He wanted to do it, he did it. What did he do? Verse 16 says, "By the multitude of thy merchandise they have filled the midst of thee with violence." They, the multitude of the merchandise. His merchandise. What is his merchandise? His merchandise was the means by which he interacted with other angels. It's the means of exchange. Merchandise refers to the means of exchange. There's a word that has that concept, the means of exchange. And so the merchandise of Lucifer was the resources he had, the means he had to interact with other angels. And it says, by the multitude of thy merchandise, the capacity he had to interact with other angels was the thing that filled him with violence. You see, what happened was, by being the anointed cherub, By having an exalted position, by having a lot of responsibility, it went to his head, so to speak. He became proud and puffed up. He said, look at who I am. I have the ability to tell other angels what to do. You know, that's a very dangerous thing. To have the authority to tell somebody else what to do. If you do not maintain a humility with that responsibility, it will cause you to become arrogant. And that's what happened with Lucifer. He became arrogant. Verse 17. Thine heart was lifted up because of thy beauty. Thou hast corrupted thy wisdom by reason of thy brightness. Now his heart was lifted up because of his beauty. Lucifer got up one morning. They don't actually sleep, you understand. But he got up one morning and he went to comb his hair. I don't know if they have hair, but he got up one morning, he went to comb his hair, he looked in the mirror and he said, wow, you know, I'm pretty good looking. I am beautiful. You know, the moment you say that, you become proud. It's like the person who won the award for being the most humble person in the whole group. Right? And they gave him a pin, the most humble person. Said, you are so humble, we are just amazed. We give you this award. They gave him this pin. And the next time they had a meeting, he wore the pin. The most humble person. He lost his humility. Because he said, oh, look who I am. And when Lucifer said, look who I am, and look what I am capable of, he became proud, he became arrogant, and that's when iniquity filled his heart. He was corrupted because of his brightness. His wisdom was corrupted even because of his brightness. When he realized how bright he was, it corrupted his ability to exercise wisdom. In verse 18, it says, thou hast defiled thy sanctuaries by the multitude of thine iniquities, by the iniquity of thy traffic. Thy traffic. That's an interesting word. Again, the idea of communication, interaction with others. So his heart is lifted up. He had been perfect in beauty. Ezekiel 28, verse 11. Not sure that's verse 12. He was perfect in beauty. Beauty suggests an appearance. When you look on someone, it's something you behold, something you see. That's what it suggests. And so the same word is used in Esther 1:11. The reason I gave you the reference there is not because it talks about angels there at all, but because it talks about Queen Vashti and how beautiful she was. And remember what the king wanted to do. He wanted to have her come in so everybody could look at her. The idea of beauty suggests the idea of appearance, something to look upon. So he had been perfect in beauty. Everybody could look at him and be certainly impressed, but when he looked at himself, he was corrupted. Here's the principle. We're under letter C, where his heart is lifted up, and number 2, what goes up must come down. Question?
Question. The two words, brightness and beauty.
Mm-hmm.
Do you really believe those words are limited to our interpretation of them in the context of our own life, or is there something else being taught?
Can you elaborate on the question a little bit?
Brightness, very, very few of us today understand or see the meaning of the word brightness. What is related to brightness, even when we think of the brightness of the Lord when Moses was in the presence of Christ. The word brightness is often lost on our generation, modern time. It had a much deeper meaning. And beauty, possibly also.
I tend to move directly to application in the use of those words. I think it's important for us always, even as we observe the factual information as it relates to us on the page, to say to ourselves, well, what does this mean to me? What can I do with this? And I think part of the application, at least, is that while we may not understand the full implication of those terms, beauty and brightness, God gave us those words because they communicate something to us in language. And beauty certainly would reference appearance, attractiveness, something that draws the attention of others. Brightness, I think, would suggest the concept of visibility. So, someone very attractive walks in the room, that person catches people's attention. Someone who is very visible, wants to be very visible, makes themselves visible. Everybody's looking at them. Some people just naturally are more visible than others. A preacher is going to be more visible than the average person sitting in the chair or the pew, so to speak, because he's up front. And so I would take the application of those terms, and certainly the brightness has to do with his proximity to the glory of God, his beauty having to do with the quality of his creative nature, but then go directly to the application. Why is God describing all of this to us? Because he wants us to avoid what Satan was guilty of. He wants us to understand why he influenced us the way he did and what Satan is trying to generate in us, because the same thing that he's guilty of is the kind of thing that he's trying to generate in our own lives. And so if it stemmed from the fact that his attractiveness brought attention to himself and his brightness made him a visible person, those are the kinds of things that we want to be careful about. If we happen to have attractiveness and visibility, we have to carry those things with humility and not allow ourselves to become arrogant because of them. Does that answer your question? Okay? All right. So, what goes up must come down. Proverbs chapter 16 and verse 18 says, pride goeth before what? Fall. So, pride takes you up. Fall brings you down. Luke chapter 14 and verse 11 says, whoever exalteth himself shall be abased. Whoever takes himself up is going to be brought down. That's a divine principle. What goes up must come down. When it goes up artificially, you understand, it goes up artificially, it will come down. Now God exalts. But when God exalts, it's not going to come back down. But when we exalt ourselves artificially, we're going to fall. Lucifer set himself up for conflict with God. Jesus described the intensity of that conflict. Isaiah said that Lucifer decided he wanted to be like God. He wasn't content with who he was and his position as the anointed cherub. That wasn't high enough. He wanted to be God. Now, go over to James chapter 4 and verse 6 just for a moment. We'll come back to Ezekiel chapter 18. James chapter 4 and verse 6. It says, but he giveth more grace. Wherefore he saith, God resisteth the proud. Now, Lucifer's problem was arrogance. He became proud, and he puffed himself up and lifted himself up, exalted himself, and said, I'm going to be like God. What was God going to... What did God have to do because of his own nature? He had to resist him. If God resists you, that's a pretty dangerous position to put yourself in, isn't it? But that's exactly what he did. He set himself up for conflict with God, and God had to resist him. And that's why Jesus described the cataclysm. He says, I saw Lucifer fall as lightning from heaven. We go back to Ezekiel chapter 28 and verse 7, and we look at this matter of his wisdom being corrupted. The word corrupted means to be spoiled, to be ruined, to be perverted. It's used in Ezekiel chapter 26 and verse 4 as the word destroyed. It was corrupted. Now think, wisdom is the application of knowledge. Wisdom is the ability to make decisions that result in productivity. The ability to decide things that will result in positive, edifying, constructive things. If he loses this ability, if his wisdom is corrupted, what happens to his ability to make decisions? And what kind of decisions is he going to make? Now he's intelligent, but that intelligence doesn't do him any good anymore. He's making some very stupid decisions because his wisdom was corrupted. I don't know if you're familiar with this phrase or not, but in the United States, some people like to use this phrase, it ain't bragging if it's true. Did you ever hear that? It ain't bragging if it's true. That's so bad. That is a justification for arrogance. I suppose that Lucifer kind of took that attitude. Well, it's true. Look at me. Look who I am. But it was a very bad thing. Lucifer showed that when he recognized his own qualities, it actually caused those qualities to deteriorate. And then it says in verse 18 that he defiled his sanctuaries. He defiled his sanctuaries. The word defiled is the word profane. Now Leviticus chapter 10 and verse 10, a very important passage of Scripture, where it tells how the priests of the tabernacle had the responsibility to demonstrate to all the rest of the people the difference between holy and unholy. What is holy? What is unholy? You show the difference. By your example, you show the difference between what is holy and unholy. Well, just as an aside, I want you to think about this. In the New Testament, in 1 Peter chapter 2, it says that believers in Christ are a royal priesthood. Do you believe in the priesthood of the believers? Are we all priests? Okay? Then by way of principle, if God's priests were responsible for showing to all the rest of the people the difference between holy and unholy, and we are the priests of God today, what is our responsibility? To show to the world the difference between what is holy and unholy. Ever have somebody say to you, oh, you have that holier than thou attitude? Well, you may be maintaining a genuine, humble attitude. But the fact is, you are more holy than they are. And that irritates them. Because darkness is always revealed by light. And if we are the light of the world, we are the lights of the world, as Jesus said we ought to be, we're showing what unholiness is by our holiness. Now, in Leviticus chapter 10, where it says, show the difference between holy and unholy, that word unholy is the same word as defiled here. This is the verb form, that's the noun form, but it's the concept of that which is profane. He became everything that was contrary to the nature of God. Now, it's very similar to the statement in Romans chapter 3 and verse 23, where it says, for all have sinned and what? Come short of the glory of God. We've fallen short of the glory of God. What happened? Here was this person who had the characterization of brightness because of his proximity to the glory of God, and now he's corrupted himself. He lost that brightness. The sanctuaries. He defiled his sanctuaries. Either the places where Lucifer dwelled or places within himself. It says in verse 16, in the midst of thee. In the midst of thee. It's an interesting concept, this sanctuary. Something dwells there. Either he dwelt there or something dwelt within him. He was made profane by the multitude of his iniquities, and he was made profane by the iniquity of his traffic. The way he was interacting with other angels became a serious problem. Trafficking, communicating, interacting back and forth became a serious problem. And it may be that the sanctuaries has to do with something in relationship to that. We go over to page 8, and it says when he fell, it was a lightning bolt in heaven. We looked at Luke chapter 10 and verse 18. He lost his beauty and took on the nature of a serpent dragon. Remember, we looked at Revelation chapter 12 earlier, and it calls him the dragon. Now think about this. Here's one who was an anointed cherub. What do you think of when you think of cherub? Well, God said, I want you to make some images of cherub and put it on the Ark of the Covenant. What was significant about the Ark of the Covenant? What was on top of the Ark of the Covenant? The seat of God, where God dwelt in the Holy of Holies, and it was the mercy seat. He wouldn't put anything unattractive there, would he? No, it would be the most beautiful thing you could think of. Here was the anointed cherub, and now he's called a dragon. What a fall. Because he did not love God with all his heart, his relationship with fellow angels was greatly affected. Go to Jude. And I want to make a point here with this. Jude verse 9. We see the contention that rises. Now, his relationship with other angels is broken. He's in conflict with them. It says, yet Michael the archangel, when contending with the devil, he disputed about the body of Moses. Here is a contention. We can look at other places, and Daniel chapter 10, the contention. Revelation chapter 12 and verse 7. There's a war in heaven. Michael and his angels, Satan and his angels. This contention. Now, did you catch what I said when I began to read that sentence? You see it in number 2. Because he did not love God with all his heart. Now understand, the truth of God and the commandments of God, as he has given them to man, come from the very heart of God and part of the nature of God. And so that this truth would be equally applicable to angelic beings. He said, the greatest commandment, the greatest commandment, is to love God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. And the second is like unto it. Love your neighbor as yourself. And then he says, for on these 2 commandments hang the whole law. I've been studying with my folks back at North Hills Bible Church through the book of Leviticus, and we came to a section where there is a list of very specific laws. And what we did was to look at those specific laws as practical applications of those two great commandments. You look at the Ten Commandments. When it says, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me," do you realize that's a practical application to the concept of loving God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength? It says, "Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain." That's a practical application of how to love God with all your heart. It says, "Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not kill." Those are practical applications of how to love your neighbor as yourself. You see, the law, in its specificity, was not intended to become a list of rules and regulations by which, through this legalistic system, you could earn credit and obtain heaven. It was intended to be an explanation of the practical application of these two great commandments. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Because that's the sum of the whole thing. And so if that is required of creatures that God created, then that was required of Lucifer, and that's exactly what he did not do. He did not love God with all his heart, because he began to love himself more than he loved God. And it should be extremely sobering for us as we examine our own hearts. Do we love God with all of our heart? Can we say that? Yet it is the greatest commandment. How do we know whether or not we love God with all our heart? Well, it tells us in 1 John that if you hate your brother, you can't love God. So you go to the law and you look at some of the practical things that describe conflicts between human beings. And it talks in the Old Testament, it does in the New Testament too, because the concept of the moral code of God is the same eternally. You know, back in Leviticus chapter 19, it talks about not holding grudges. Isn't that interesting? You can't love your neighbor as yourself if you hold a grudge. So Lucifer violates the greatest commandment of all. He doesn't love God with all his heart. As a result, his relationship with other angels deteriorated. When we don't love God with all our heart, our relationship with other people will deteriorate. And when we love God with all our heart, our relationship with other people will come into perspective. And it doesn't even matter if they're our enemies, we will still love them. That doesn't mean you simply have a good feeling towards them. Because after all, remember how it was that Jesus Christ loved us. God commended his love towards us, in that while we were yet sinners, Christ, he did what? Died for us. You see, to love someone means that you do whatever is necessary to meet the needs they cannot fill in their own lives. That was why he described loving your neighbor as yourself with the story of the Good Samaritan. It was a man who had a need. He couldn't fill it for himself. And so this person loved him as himself. He met the need. Satan doesn't have those characteristics. Let's talk a little bit about demons. The word demon in the Bible is there's a distinction between the devil and a devil. Let's go to John chapter 8. John chapter 8, verse 44. John chapter 8, verse 44 says, "Ye are of your father the devil." And then you go to verse 48. It says, "Then answered the Jews and said unto him, Say we not well that thou art a Samaritan and hast a devil?" Now, here in the English, I don't know how it is in the Afrikaans. Is it the same word? Translated the same word? In those two cases? Yeah? Well, like the English, it's translated the same word, but it comes from two different Greek words. In verse 44, it's the word diabolos. In verse 48, it's the word daimonion. And so you have two different words. They're both translated the same, but they're different. One is diabolos, which means the slanderer, the false accuser. And that's the characterization of Satan. That's his typical activity. But daimonion is a demon, a spirit being inferior to God. And there are other places that we could look that would verify that. We know the devil is the great dragon, that old serpent, the devil, Satan, Revelation chapter 12 and verse 9. But we have to ask the question now, if the devil is diabolos and the devils, a devil is a daimonion, who are these creatures? Are they the same as fallen angels? Are demons and fallen angels the same? We want to look at this a little bit. Satan is their prince. I'm hoping that you're familiar with Matthew chapter 12, verses 22 through 28, where the Pharisees accused Jesus of performing his miracles in the power of Beelzebub. Beelzebub is a term that means the Lord of the Fly. It is a Philistine deity who was worshipped in Ekron, but there is a connection in the passage. In Matthew chapter 12 there, when the Pharisees accused him of casting out demons in the name of Beelzebub, in the power of Beelzebub, Jesus says that's not logical. Because if Satan cast out Satan, he'd be divided against himself. So Jesus himself, in the context, relates Satan to Beelzebub. So Satan, or Beelzebub, is the prince of these spirit beings, these devils or demons. And so the demons are spirits. Let's go to Matthew chapter 8 and verse 16. It says, "When the even was come, they brought unto him many that were possessed with devils, and he cast out the spirits." Do you see the connection between the term devils and spirits? They were possessed with devils, and he cast out the spirits. Watch that in Scripture. God will explain terms in the context. See the connection of terms. One time he says devils, the other time he says spirits. That means that those are interchangeable terms. Devils are spirits. You can see that in the other passages that are listed there. It also says that the devils possess spirits. Look over in Luke chapter 4 and verse 33. This is interesting. Just the way it phrases it, to see a different way of phraseology and explanation. Luke chapter 4 and verse 33. It says, "And in the synagogue there was a man which had a spirit of an unclean devil, and cried out with a loud voice." I really think that's just another way of describing the fact that these devils are spirit beings. And devils and spirits are related in activities. You can look those verses up and notice that. Also, it's obvious that the demons are negatively characterized in the Bible. They're characterized by negative adjectives. In Luke 4:33, they're called unclean. In Luke 7:21, they're called evil. In Luke 11:26, they're called wicked. In 1 Timothy 4:1, they're called seducing. They are contrary to God. People make sacrifices to devils in 1 Corinthians 10:20. And James chapter 2 and verse 19 is where it says, the devils believe God and do what? Tremble. I kind of rushed through that. We just have a couple of minutes here in this session. I wanted to get over to page 9 and talk about how demons are the same as fallen angels.
Can I ask one?
Okay?
Is there a fairly strong possibility, or do you think no possibility, that the theory that the word devil is generally being corrected throughout the Gospels because it's really a popular folk term of the Jewish people, and all these verses that use devil and spirit are constantly really, the word spirit is the correct word, and devil is the folk term, and so you see that they'll say, this person has devils, that's what people popularly call them, but he didn't ever agree that he cast out devils because that was sort of I'll call it sort of like a popular term, and the real term is spirit.
That's certainly a possibility. I think...
Have you read that before?
No, I haven't actually read that before, but I think that's certainly a possibility. I think his intention is for us to understand that they are spirits.
That's right.
Yeah. And relate that to Jesus appearing to the disciples after the resurrection in the room where the door was closed, and he was there, and they were afraid because they supposed that they had seen a spirit. And he said, a spirit does not have something that I have. What did he have? He had flesh and bone. He said a spirit doesn't have flesh and bone. Now I think that's significant with something that I want to touch on here. Okay? So we pursue this. There are angels that fell. I'll just refer you to this in 2 Peter chapter 2 and verse 4. It says, refers to angels that sinned, and Jude 6 says angels lost their first estate. They left their own habitation. Angels fell. Okay? So we understand that concept. These are referred to as Satan's angels. Matthew 25, verse 41 says that the everlasting fire was prepared for the devil and his angels. Okay? His angels. They're Satan's angels. But Satan is also called the prince of devils, Beelzebub. Matthew 12, 24 to 26. Now, the fallen angels are reserved unto judgment. I want you to look at this. 2 Peter chapter 2 and verse 4. It says, for if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment. Now, this is a very interesting passage of Scripture, and it goes with Jude 6. Let's go over there and read that one right away. Jude verse 6, to get them together. It says, and the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness, unto the judgment of the great day. Chains of darkness, everlasting chains under darkness. Let me present my theory. I'm interpreting... I'm certainly open to discussion on the matter, but this is what I believe for a long time and am convinced of. A lot of people say there are some of the angels that fell he has confined, locked up, and these chains of darkness are referring to the horrible creatures that he's going to release in the middle of the tribulation period. Actually, what I believe that this is referring to is the fact that he has taken away the angels' ability to manifest themselves. Now, we've seen good angels manifest themselves, make themselves visible to you and to me. But every recorded instance in Scripture where a demon or devil or fallen angel manifested himself, he had to do it through another vehicle. That's why they possess human beings, as a means of manifesting themselves. And remember, when Jesus was going to cast these evil spirits out of the man that was possessed, they didn't want to just be cast out into space. They said, please send us over into these swine. Because the only way they can manifest themselves is to possess some other visible object, because he's confined them to chains of darkness. Now think about this. These were angels who used to be in the presence of God and enjoyed the glory of God and the ability to manifest themselves as the good angels do, with this glory and this brightness. And now they're in chains of darkness. That is a terrible thing. These are truly unfortunate creatures. The devil persuaded them. They went along. We must beware, because the devil wants to persuade us to follow him as well. And when we come together tomorrow evening, we're going to go into this next section, the wiles of the devil. This is crucial material. I look forward to the opportunity of sharing some things with you.
I hope you're finding Pastor Moss's teaching as useful as I am. This presentation was supplied by Pastor Moss and the good people of North Hills Bible Church. North Hills Bible Church is located at 1951 North Hills Road, York, Pennsylvania. The zip there is 17406. The church's website is www.northhillsbiblechurch.org, and you may contact David at davidmoss@comcast.net. Please join us again when Congdon Ministries brings you another of Pastor Moss's class. I note that this material is copyrighted and all rights are reserved by David Moss and by Congdon Ministries International. Now, until next time, may the Lord bless you mightily. And until we meet again, either here or in the air, Lord bless.